Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Ben, this is Books with Genghis Khan, and here's my December wrap-up for all the books I read last month, and it was a packed month of great reading of just one single series and author, kind of. That is the Expanse series by James S. A. Corey or Ty Frank and Daniel Abraham. I didn't really plan to just read the Expanse, I wanted to get started with it, but then I just got caught up and I couldn't tear myself away. And so I just read The Expanse last month, and here we go. Started off with Leviathan Wakes, Book 1. I gave this one an easy 5 stars. It was tied for my 10th best read of last year. I really love this one. This surprised me because I had watched the first couple seasons of The Expanse a few years ago. I liked it, but didn't get so invested in it that I even needed to continue as I started to get bored with it in season 4. And even knowing what was going to happen, I just got completely engaged in this story all over again. And I think it taught me that reading is just by far and away my preferred way of consuming a story and experiencing a particular narrative. Because I can visualize everything based on descriptions, I'm getting the visuals, and then I'm also getting the thoughts and reflections of characters that you just cannot get most of the time through watching a TV show or movie. And so I love seeing the world through this third-person limited perspective. And it was really cool, actually, in this book. It has a very unique feel because of the two authors. They had split up. One author wrote Holden's POV, another author wrote Miller's POV, and they switch off every chapter, and they have very different tones and styles. Miller's this kind of gumshoe detective personality, and he's this loner philosophical type, and the prose in that section is more flowery, more philosophical. It has a completely different feel from Holden's chapters. Holden's just this kind of very straightforward, not too deep of a thinker kind of guy, and it has a different feel. And that's what I really love also about all the rest of the POVs in this series, is that you get a very different worldview in all of them. And it was a very interesting kind of back and forth in this book that I really loved, and set up just a very suspenseful plot for the series. And then after each book, I've just been going in publication order with the novels and also the short stories. And so I've had a blast reading a novel and then reading the next short story or novelette. Some of them might even approach novella length, but they're usually not too long. And they take you to either flashbacks with important characters or moments in the series. They take you to different locations that the novels don't spend much time in. And they give you really cool world building and personal stories. I was always engaged. I'm not a lover of short fiction, but I thought these were really well done. And so yeah, they're all collected here in this Memories Legion collection. It's not out in paperback just yet, so I had to get the hardcover, even though everything else is paperback here. But yeah, really solid, and it's nice because you just do it in pub order. And then Book 2, Caliban's War, also a 5-star read for me. We have new POVs in here, Avasarala and Bobby, who were just dynamite characters for me. Loved these new POVs. I got very attached to these characters very quickly, and the plot just heats up in this one. There's political factions that have a very tense kind of, they're on the brink of war possibly, and there's a very high stakes personal plot that the Rocinante crew gets involved with here. Yeah, just high stakes, lots of tension, great personalities in the POVs. Loved this book. Which takes me to Abaddon's Gate. So this is the book that I've given the lowest rating to so far. That's 3 stars. It was still engaging all the way through. The plot was very well done and very suspense-filled as usual. But it had a bunch of new POVs and kind of veered away from some of the newer POVs we'd gotten from the last book. So that was kind of a disappointment, and I never got too invested in some of the new POVs here. And then we have a human antagonist who is really a chore to read as the POV. Melba, just a poorly executed character. And so that was kind of a damper on my enjoyment of this one. But the overall plot was still really interesting, and it was very important too, the things that happened here. So it was a little blip on my journey, but still very worthwhile. Book 4, I think I gave this one 4 stars. This was a solid return to form for me, where I was engaged by all the POVs. There's a really interesting mix of POVs here too. I'm gonna stay very vague so I don't give any spoilers away. There's a biologist point of view, and the enthusiasm that Okoye has for her field of study and for learning about ecology and the natural world comes through in her POV so well. There's also a security POV that was really interesting and well done. And some of the things in here with the human antagonists and human conflicts didn't work for me too well, which prevented it from being 5 stars. And this is the book where I was really thinking about how, I don't know why Ty Frank and Daniel Abraham are so committed to having a human antagonist in every single one of these books. And it hurt the story here, because Project Hail Mary is one of my favorite books of all time, and was so tense and suspenseful with no human antagonists. The antagonists in that book are a sticky situation, random chance, biology, physics. Can they solve problems? And sometimes you don't need a human villain, and they become caricatures if they're not set up properly, and then just kind of get in the way of enjoying the story for me. And that's what happened here with Mercury's character. I've seen a lot of people agree with that. Thankfully, they don't get too much page time, but it was just so unnecessary. This character's priorities just didn't make real sense, and the situation in this book was so cool and high stakes without a human antagonist. So yeah, wish they would have done a few things differently, but still really great entry. And then book 5, Nemesis Games, the whole series gets turned on its head, and for a long series that's 9 books, having something in the middle that shakes things up a lot is great and refreshing, and built up my momentum reading this all over again. And so there's really cool big events. You get new POVs that you've kind of been waiting for many books to have, and that was so cool. And yeah, don't want to say too much, but a very different book that set up a very high stakes, suspenseful plot. So Nemesis Games is just a rip-roaring story. Love the POVs, and it changes the whole series and turns it on its head in a really cool way. And so I think I gave this one 4.5 stars. My emotional investment, I think, is just flagging at this point. I had been reading a lot of The Expanse, and so I probably would have been better served taking a break from it after book 3 or 4. But I just was so hooked. I just needed to see what was going to happen next. Like you're binging a TV show is basically how this month went for me. So yeah, 4.5 stars for Nemesis Games. And then Babylon's Ashes, I gave the same 4.5 stars. It ended in a really interesting and satisfying way. And actually these books, Nemesis Games and Babylon's Ashes, had the first really complex, interesting human antagonist. And that really boosted, I think, the overall feel of these books and my engagement in what was happening and how it was playing out. So it was a complicated antagonist and someone that was more relatable and understandable in their motivations and their actions and priorities. So that was a big help to these last 2 books of this first arc of The Expanse, because after this, there's a 30-year time jump, which is an interesting amount of years for a time jump. I was going to take a break after this, actually, until I was just like, oh, what, these characters who are like in their 30s, some older, it's like 30 years is an interesting place to put them at least in this world, though. Middle age is being in your like 60s or 70s with medical advancements. And so I was just so curious how things were going to be changed or different politically, personally for everyone. And I couldn't help myself. I actually jumped in to book 7 recently at the end of the month, and I'm still reading that one. And yeah, it was actually really interesting and enjoyable to see how it picked up after the time jump. It was seamless, and this doesn't necessarily feel like 2 separate series arcs. It's just that they jumped over 30 years in world where really nothing eventful was happening, but for the real plot of this last 3 books to kick in, they needed some in-world time to kind of pass by. And so yeah, the time jump didn't actually feel like it changed much, and it comes back and it's really the same overarching story that's happening. So I don't even know that I'd think of it as 2 different series arcs, although you could, and that would also make sense. But yeah, I'm enjoying book 7, and I've really enjoyed my time overall with the Expanse books. They've been all solidly engaging reads, some maybe a little more gripping than others, but it's been a blast. Daniel Abraham and Ty Frank have done such a great job with a very believable hard sci-fi near future. And their attention to detail is just tremendous, whether it's little things that everyone on ships has to worry about, the air quality, the water, the gravity under acceleration, and what it's doing to different people depending on how they grew up, if they grew up on Earth or Mars or in space. Just little details like that keep me so immersed in this series. And whether it's the culture world building, which is so believable and interesting, whether it's the Earth culture, the culture of the Mars, the Martians, people who grew up in a very militaristic culture underground, or the culture of the Belters, the people who grew up in space, in spaceships, or on moons out in the Jupiter or Saturn system. And they all have very different cultural priorities and ways of viewing the world. Even within Earth, someone who comes from a very privileged background like Holden views things very differently from Amos, coming from a kind of poor criminal underbelly kind of background. And that is at the heart of the series. What I find so interesting is that there's so many different, very relatable human characters thrown into very tense situations. There's a lot of competent characters, a lot of morally very good characters dealing with huge issues that are, you know, the whole human race might be at stake, or the fate of Earth, Mars, and all of humanity. And they're very good at what they do, some of them, whether it's pilots, the soldier types, the captains like Holden. They're often very competent, very smart. Maybe not Holden so much in the beginning of the series, but whether it's Avasarala as this uber competent politician, who's one of the only really competent politicians that I truly believe is very convincing and persuasive and good at her job in a book. And so I love reading about competent characters using their wits and their skills to solve issues. There's also a great found family element to this series, which is comforting. And so there's lots of things which were easy to fall in love with for me. And I liken this kind of series to a roller coaster ride. So it might be a lot of fun. Some of the times there's that tension and suspense on the roller coaster as things are building. Then there's the thrills. There's some really intense action, although there's not as much action as you might think. But there are great thrills and really suspenseful situations. And then there's the cathartic releases of the falling action and how things all wrap up in a lot of the books as you're coming into the station of the roller coaster. And then you had a great thrill ride, but it's not like the roller coaster ride changed your life in any way or made you think about things completely differently. But it was a great time. It was fun. It was worthwhile. That's how I feel about this series. And I'm going to try to do a whole series review when I finish this to really bring a lot more of my specific thoughts about the positives that this series brings. But it was a wonderful month getting immersed in the Expanse. And yeah, would highly recommend the series as long as you're looking for something that is not going to be too challenging in terms of the prose, the challenging in terms of ideas, just figuring out what's going on. Other things to be a little more deep philosophically, maybe Sun Eater, or if you just want something overall more challenging for your own worldviews or just to figure out what's going on in the book, the Malazan books are great for that. But for a great, fun, tense, suspenseful ride where you can get invested, this is a perfect series. My book of the month is actually book 1, Leviathan Wakes. This might be mainly because of how surprised I was. I didn't have such high expectations going in, and then I ended up loving it. And this also is for the unique alternating chapter structure where one author took writing Miller's POV, the other author took Holden. None of the other books, I think, followed that same format. They all have more POVs, and I think the authors didn't split it up in terms of POV after this book. So this book just has a really weird, interesting, cool feel that I don't get to experience too often, and I really enjoyed Miller's POV in particular, a very strange character who is maybe not very self-aware and just very interesting following Miller and Holden and then how things intersect. So yeah, this is such a cool book. It sets up a really wonderful roller coaster ride of a series, and yeah, couldn't ask for anything more for a series starter. And in terms of what am I planning to read in January, I'm hoping to get to A Touch of Light. That's Tiago Abdallah's book 1 in Ashes of Avron series. And then I want to also do some reading out of James Clavell's Shogun. So that is a big historical not fantasy, just historical fiction set in Japan. Something very new for me, and I'm going to be intrigued to see how it goes. I'll be continuing Persepolis Rising, and there's probably a good chance that I will head into Book 8, Tiamat's Wrath, as well. I am going to wait for the paperback for Leviathan Falls. That's getting released early next month, so there's good timing on that, so I can have the full paperback set of all 9 novels, and I'll probably do that early next month. So can't wait to see how this is closing, because this new story arc in Book 7 is really cool, and I really have no clue where it's going to go. Alright, let me know what some of your favorite reads from December were, what you're excited about to read this month, and I'll see you next time.